Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio. Welcome back to Policy and Rates here on Depictions Media Radio. I'm your host, Michael Clogs. In this next show, we're going to hear the United Nations Security Council and press briefings about the Ukraine and other issues. Some of those issues are going to include attacks against worshippers and prayer goers at a mosque in Palestine. And we're also going to hear as the Russian diplomat to the UN still accusing the United States and Western allies of formulating and using chemical weapons that are against the Geneva Conventions and against what modern and fair warfare are supposed to be about. They are claiming that they have proof and that the attacks on Bucha were the idea that the Russian soldiers, they created mass killings and atrocities and war crimes in Bucha is a fabrication, and it couldn't have been done by the Russian soldiers, and in fact it was actually done by the mass killings were actually done by artillery fire from the Ukrainian soldiers. So they are in denial that that they have done anything wrong, and that the war against the Ukrainian government is justified and perfectly legal according to international laws. We're also going to hear how the UN is saying that both sides simply must stop fighting. The war has to come to an end, and a peace needs to be found.
For joining us at this press conference with the Ambassador Federico Villegas, the President of the Human Rights Council for 2022. The President is completing a very long and very difficult week with many meetings throughout the week with various officials. He'll talk about some of the meetings he's had this week, and he wanted to take the opportunity, of course, to meet with you, members of the press. I should point out, my name is Rolando Gomez. I'm the media officer for the Human Rights Council in the Office of the High Commissioner based in Geneva. So again, Ambassador Villegas was concluding his first official visit in the capacity of his presidency, which he started on the 1st of January this year. So he'll deliver some brief opening remarks, and then over to you for your questions as usual. And if you could kindly just introduce yourselves, as I see some familiar faces, but I don't know a lot of you. So if you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves, we'd appreciate that. Over to you, Ambassador Villegas.
Good morning to all. Thank you very much, Rolando, and happy Mother Earth Day to everybody and to the Earth. Today is Happy Mother Earth Day. And I wanted to take the opportunity to meet you, and the media, of course, is one of the stakeholders and invaluable partner of the Human Rights Council. and you are partners for promoting human rights also. Therefore, for me, it's very important to have this meeting, and thank you for coming and for those connected. This week, I met with various UN officials, of course, including the Secretary General Guterres. I will meet with the President of the General Assembly right after this meeting with you. And I met various diplomats, representatives of civil society, special rapporteurs, special envoys, and of course with you. On most of the meetings, I briefed them on the 49th session of the Council, which recently concluded. We also brainstormed many times on ways we can strengthen the UN human rights pillar, including in view of conflict prevention, during conflict, and in post-conflict reconstruction efforts. And of course, the conflict in Ukraine was also central to almost every discussion this week. The 49th session of the Council that concluded on April 1st was the longest in the Council's history, 5 full weeks. It shows the increased demand and interest for the Council's work and the expanding agenda. So what we feel is that the Human Rights Council is growing centrality and relevance in multilateral diplomacy. Of course, the outstanding issue at the beginning of the session that was not expected was to have an urgent debate on Ukraine and the situation of Ukraine and violations stemming from the Russian aggression. And we had the urgent debate, and 4 days after that urgent debate, we had to vote for that debate, to have it, and we had it, and we voted a commission of inquiry as one of the most important outcomes of the resolution approved on March 4th. Of course, in relation to Ukraine, the most important thing is I would like to express, as President of the Human Rights Council, my condolences for all the victims of the conflict. And I think that war in Ukraine must stop now. This war has led to senseless loss of life, massive devastation, and the people in Ukraine have endured horrors, and they need peace. And in the context of this, how the multilateral system and the UN system responded, I can say as President of the Human Rights Council that I'm very proud to be president of a body that was able to deliver timely on this issue at the time that maybe others were not able to deliver. And we reacted rapidly. We had expected to monitor the situation on Ukraine, a regular report on March 29th that was scheduled in the Council's agenda, but of course we couldn't wait, and we immediately had, as I mentioned, the session. And that commission of inquiry, the members had to be appointed by the President of the Council, and I decided to do it as quickly and in a record time. Before the session was over, the 3 members were appointed. And if you don't know, it's Erik Mose from Norway, Jasminka Zumur from Bosnia-Herzegovina, and Pablo de Grave from Colombia. And the Commission has already begun its work and will be fully operational soon. After the session, of course, the General Assembly here in New York voted to suspend Russia from the Human Rights Council. This was followed by Russia's own withdrawal from the Council, a letter that was sent to me hours after the suspension. The end result is that the Russian Federation is no longer a member of the Human Rights Council, and their seat will now be filled by another country from the Eastern European group that we expect the General Assembly in the coming weeks. There will be a candidacy, and we expect to have an election, and hopefully for the June session we have the full membership ready. On the 49th session summary, basically 35 resolutions were adopted, 15 on country situations. In addition, over 50 countries' situations raised during the general debates, and around the same number of human rights themes. There's a wide agenda in the Human Rights Council, and there is a collective will of promote and expand our agenda. Some key outcomes that I think are worth to mention: we called for more COVID vaccine equities. We put fake news and disinformation, particularly on social media, on the human rights agenda. And all these themes that I'm mentioning are object of resolutions adopted by the Council. We extended the mandates on South Sudan, DPRK, Myanmar, Syria, Iran, Belarus, OPT, Occupied Palestine Territories, Georgia, and Mali. We established a new panel to monitor human rights situation in Nicaragua, first time. And I will appoint the 3 members for the Nicaragua group of experts in the following weeks. And the Council also appointed the first ever Special Rapporteur on Climate Change, Yang Fry from Tuvalu, following the creation of the mandate by the HRC in October. And last, the New York meetings, I had very intense week, but very worthy, I think. In addition to the Secretary General and the President of the GA, my meetings included the heads of UNDP and UNFPA, the special representatives on violence against children and on sexual violence in conflict, the special advisor on genocide, the chair of the third committee, the president of ECOSOC, the president of the Security Council, a number of civil society organizations, which are also, like the press, invaluable partners of the Council, and other officials and several diplomats very interested in the Human Rights Council work, including the PRs of the United States of America, PRs of the Baltic states, and this morning I met with the PR of Ukraine before this meeting. In conclusion, I also had this week the opportunity to give presentations and lectures in New York University on Tuesday and New School yesterday, Thursday. So in short, while part of the system was still and blocked to react, the Human Rights Council was able to respond to the crisis and has really reacts and delivered in this moment. We are here to continue delivering results, not only on the situation in Ukraine, on many, many other themes and countries, and because we owe them to the suffering of victims all over the world, and the constructive dialogue that we're able to carry out, regardless of the problems that we address in the Council, is the big asset, and we will continue to do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Over to you for your questions now. Please, in the front row. Thank you.
Thank you, Valeria Robeco from ANSA Newswire, and on behalf of ANCA, we thank you for this press conference. So my question is, Russia has been suspended from the Human Rights Council. We know what does it mean in theory, but I would like to ask what this concretely change, and also if you plan to take other measures regarding the invasion of Ukraine. Thank you so much.
One. Okay. Thank you. Yes, Russia has been suspended by the General Assembly. The rights of Russia as a member have been suspended, which is what the resolution that created the Council provides. But as you know, immediately after that, withdrew its membership before the end of the term. Therefore, according to, of course, the rules, the General Assembly's resolution that regulate, Russia becomes an observer to the Council. And the rights of the observers, of course, are totally different. They cannot vote. And it's another type of participation in the council, another time limit for speaking up in case there is a possibility of speaking. So what will happen is that there will be a new member of the council from the Eastern European group with the full rights, and Russia will be one of the observer members, one of the 100 and something observer members that we have in the council. Measures, the additional measures are to follow up the resolution that we created. We created a historic resolution, first time that a commission of inquiry of this kind is created on a permanent member of the Security Council, and is full operational. It will start working. It already is working with the help of the monitoring commission that is in Ukraine. And so the additional measures is to have a good implementation of the resolution and work closely with the experts.
James, go ahead.
James Bays, Al Jazeera. First, just to check your meetings in New York, did you meet Ambassador Nebenzia or any other representative of the permanent mission of the Russian Federation? And then my main question, you have your human rights monitoring mission, you have your commission of inquiry now. But, for example, the latest information we have, satellite imagery showing mass graves near Mariupol, in an area that is controlled by Russian forces. How worried are you that this evidence, you're not going to get to, that these investigators you've got are not going to get to Mariupol? And what is your message to the Russian Federation about access of your investigators?
I haven't met the Russian Federation mission here, but I am in permanent dialogue with the Russian mission in Geneva. So I have met with the Russian ambassador in Geneva. And in regarding the human rights mission, the monitoring mission in the Ukraine will complement the work of the Commission of Inquiry. They are collecting evidence, and they are bringing testimonies that will be the basis also for the work of the Commission of Inquiry. But of course, the access to all areas is very important. And that is precisely the added value of the Commission of Inquiry created by the Council. Because, as you know, it's an independent commission, and the idea is that this commission has the credibility and the possibility to be having access to all areas where they need to do their work. So my message, if I have to give one, is to cooperate with the mandate and the commission created by the Council, and we will very much like to see to have them access to all places where they have to do their work.
What powers do you have if you don't get access? What powers do you have to enforce that access? I mean, you say they're very well-known people on the commission, and that's good, and they're respected and whatever. But what if you're not given access?
The only power I have as president is to keep the dialogue with all members and with all parties in order to help that commission has access. If we guarantee the independence of that commission, they will have the credibility to have access. And I will do every day an effort to talk to everybody that could have the key for them to have access, whether it's the Russian Federation, whether it's the authority that is there in any of the territories. So, and that is why if you look, the independent experts I chose are not any experts, because one of the most difficult things, I have to be honest, was to find highly qualified people, but at the same time people that have not outspoken openly, naturally, on a conflict of this nature. And that was very difficult because of obvious reasons of the impact. And the three experts are three highly qualified people and independent, experience, and I think they have the credibility that the Russian Federation should consider to give them access to all places.
If I may just add, Ambassador, the Independent International Commission of Inquiry is independent. The operative word is independent. They will be pronouncing themselves in the coming days on how they interpret that mandate given to them by the Council and how they will discharge that mandate. So, of course, we will make sure that that message gets to you here in New York. Next question. Yes, please, sir.
Thank you. Philippe Rater for Agence France Presse. Going back to the election, when do you expect it? Can you be a little more precise? Is it possible to have it next week? And also about the candidate, you say it would be from East European countries. Do you have any names to? Did you hear that any of these countries are candidates?
It's up to the General Assembly in New York. You will probably know before we do in Geneva, but I'm sure countries are moving forward to have it in the next few weeks, and I haven't heard so far names of candidates. Thank you.
Question? Yes, please go ahead. I'll take the young lady in the back, and then you.
Hi, I'm Margaret Bashir with the Voice of America. Thank you for the briefing. Just could you give us some more details on cooperation so far with the COI? I mean, the Ukrainians are welcoming it, I'm assuming, but the Russians, have you had any, what's the ambassador in Geneva told you about it? Like we've seen in past, for instance, with Syria, that they've sort of dismissed these sorts of investigations as political and such. So are you finding difficulties at the outset, for instance, or is there a sort of a good working situation so far? Thank you.
What we need to do is to work with all actors in order for this commission to do its work on accountability. And the independence is key for confidence-building measures with all actors, including the Russian Federation. So, of course, the first reaction to the Commission of Inquiry by the Russian Federation at the moment we approved the resolution on March 4th was negative in the sense that they voted against the resolution. But once the Commission is approved, it's a mechanism of the Council. And if the Russian Federation wants to have their truth on what's happening, the best way is to let the Commission of Inquiry access and do their work. So the only thing that I will do is to insist, like I do with every single country that doesn't cooperate with mechanisms. This will not be the first. We have several countries, as you know, that have commissions that are created but do not cooperate, do not let them access. But we have others that they have done that originally were against the creation of a mechanism, but after confidence-building measures, dialogue, and having the proof that it's independent, they granted access. And there are success stories of this. So I will continue doing all my efforts because the victims in Ukraine deserve, for me as president, to do all my efforts to dialogue with the Russian Federation to give the opportunity of this Commission of Inquiry to work.
And could you just remind us how many monitors there are in the monitoring mission? I recall it was a small number. And are they actually still in the country in the midst of the hostilities? Where are they?
They are everywhere. And there are 24, I think, but this is more the Office of the High Commissioner's responsibility. And they are everywhere. They have been to Bucha, they have been to many places, and they're collecting evidence. And that's why it's so important that their work is complementary. I have to remind you that there are cases, important precedents of mechanisms of the Council of Human Rights working on this type of collecting evidence that end up being the basis for prosecutions. And the most recent example is the Syrian general that was prosecuted in Germany, in Koblenz. And if you look at that prosecution, he has been sentenced for life in Germany. They've used the findings of the Commission of Inquiry of Syria created by the Council. So that's why it's important to collect and preserve evidence, and they are everywhere, they are there, and the Commission of Inquiry that we created with this mandate is supposed to be fully operational, and I understand from Vienna will be the base in order to work.
So then could the monitoring mission's information or evidence they collect also be used by the ICC prosecutor, or does that have to be an entirely separate investigation?
What I don't know. It's up to the ICC to see where is the evidence that they will gather. What I can say is that the commission that we created and the resolution is very clear that the evidence is collected in order to move forward in the identification of responsibilities and the bringing to justice of those responsible. So it is a collective evidence towards the accountability, and the only reparation that the victims in Ukraine, the real reparation they can have, is justice.
I can get, sorry, just on the monitoring mission, I would need to verify the actual numbers and where they are. Colleagues at the Office of the High Commissioner could share that with you. Maybe after the briefing we can have a conversation on that. Thanks. Please, sir, go ahead.
Thank you for this briefing. Abdullah Imasi from Al Arabi TV. I do have a question regarding the situation in the Middle East. Since you have monitors in the Palestinian territory, if I'm wrong, please correct me. Is there any action from the UN Human Rights Council regarding current report on violations in Jerusalem?
We have several mechanisms established because we have several resolutions in the Council that address from different points of view the situation in the occupied Palestinian territories. And no, I don't have a specific new information as to the recent events.
If I may just, Ambassador, just to point out that the Independent International Commission of Inquiry that was set up by the Human Rights Council in May last year following a special session of the Council is scheduled to report back to the Human Rights Council at our next session in June, and they will pronounce themselves at that point. Yes, please, in the back.
Thank you. Stefano Vaccara, La Voce di New York. I'm sorry, but I'm perplexed on what you said before when you said experience before there is if they understand that there is independence in the investigation, we are confident that they will be allowed and so on. I mean, I don't think we are in a Detective Colombo episode where the assassin collaborates with the detective until he finds he's guilty. So if crime against humanity have been committed, and if Russia is responsible, it will not they will not collaborate with you. So what is the alternative plan to still find out the crime?
The Human Rights Council has its methods, has its mandate, and what we have done is to do exactly which is in our mandate, in our possibility, creating a commission of inquiry. And I will continue to do my efforts in order for this commission to work. But of course, what your point is totally valid, and we don't know if they will be able to grant access. We don't have more power than the power of creating an accountability mechanism immediately for this situation. So that's all I can say on behalf of the Council.
Thank you. Further questions? I don't see any hands raised online, so If there are none in the room, then I would say thank you very much for you.
So, 30 seconds to go, and we'll start. Keep them for the time being. Okay. Okay, then let's maybe start. Dear colleagues, as you may have noticed, we do our best to keep you updated on the non-proliferation threats in Ukraine. I will be frank, the situation is very alarming. Our Ministry of Defense keeps collecting information that the Kyiv regime, backed by the US, is preparing staged provocations in order to accuse the Russian armed forces of using chemical, biological, and tactical nuclear weapons. There are three possible scenarios of this. The first one is a staged incident under a false flag, an actual use of chemical or biological weapons resulting in casualties among the civilians. Another option, a staged so-called Russian sabotage at those facilities in Ukraine where components of weapons of mass destruction were produced. We have reasons to believe that this is exactly what Kyiv regime and its sponsors are planning to do at the chemical and biological facilities in Kyiv and Kharkov. There can also be provocations at the nuclear energy facilities, in particular Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, controlled by the Russian Federation. On April 21, our armed forces countered an attempt by a convoy of 10 motor vehicles to transport dangerous cargo to this nuclear power plant. In addition, there are indications that Kyiv regime is considering an option of striking the radioactive waste storage facility at the former Pridniprovsky chemical plant in the Kamenskoye settlement in the Dnepropetrovsk region. Unfortunately, this scenario seems to be most probable now. I encourage you to take note of the specific locations so that it does not come as a surprise if an incident happens. We have warned the world about it. The second scenario is a covert use of weapons of mass destruction by the Kyiv regime and radical groups in small volumes for tactical purposes. According to the available information, this was planned to be implemented at the seized Azovstal facility. However, the decision of the Russian leadership to cancel the assault compromised these plans. You cannot fully exclude the third scenario, when the Kyiv regime and radical groups use the weapons of mass destruction on the battlefield in case they fail to gain superiority by conventional means. As far as we know, it's an option considered for Slavyansk and Kramatorsk that have been transformed into fortified objects. I would like to stress what has long been considered as unthinkable is now a realistic scenario plotted by the Kyiv regime, encouraged and supported by the USA. There are numerous indications of that. One of them is the hysteria about the possible use of chemical substances deliberately stirred up by the Western media and Western politicians. On this point, I would like to encourage you to stop and think out of this propagandistic fog of war. Even if we set aside a proven fact that Russia does not possess any chemical or biological weapons, what is the rationale for using them in Ukraine, in the close proximity to the Russian border? Clearly, in the wildest theory, we would gain nothing more than we would get by conventional means. The only beneficiary here is the Kyiv regime and radical groups, which use terror and intimidation of civilians as a method of warfare. They have nothing to lose, and they will stop at nothing. At the same time, the US and its allies has a proven record of using the weapons of mass destruction allegations to assault sovereign countries which do not want to succumb to their pressure. This is exactly what happened to Syria and Iraq. There is a clear pattern of how the US-backed groups stage such provocations in other parts of the world. First, a so-called chemical incident is orchestrated. Then the pro-Western NGOs, in particular notorious White Helmets, who stay on alert nearby, expeditiously arrive to the venue and collect, in violation of all non-proliferation norms and procedures, shaky evidence. Then they feed this narrative to the Western media. We all know this methodology. I can say that the curators of the Kyiv regime are not very creative, so they prepare more or less the same scenario for Ukraine. The White Helmets instructors are already stationed in Ukraine. It's on the news, you can see it in the news. The USA has been already supplying specific antidotes to toxic substances to Ukraine. In 2022 alone, it transferred to Ukraine more than 220,000 of vials with atropines, which is another indication that the preparation of provocations, specifically with the use of nerve agents, is underway. I would like to draw your attention to the fact that on April 21, 2022, a container with ampoules was dropped onto the positions of Russian troops from a drone. It was planned that their destruction would trigger a chemical reaction that would cause an explosion and fire, releasing toxic substances not included in the CWC lists. The Laboratory 27 of the Scientific Center of the Russian Ministry of Defense, accredited by the Organization of the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, is analyzing the substances in the ampoules. The results of the analysis will be sent to the OPCW Technical Secretariat in line with the established practice. Over the weekend, we circulated these materials as an official document of the Security Council. They will also be circulated in the General Assembly. Colleagues, the world should not be misled once again. That's why we want you to stay on high alert on these warnings. I would like also to stress that disinformation and provocations from Ukraine and its Western sponsors have recently become a trademark of the hostilities in this country. But now it looks that they get trapped in their own lies. You all remember Bucha, a staged and hyped up case where the West collectively tried to shift the blame to the Russian army, claiming that it is responsible for mass killing of civilians. However, it has been obvious from the very beginning that there is no more than a crude fake and provocation in Bucha, following well-known patterns used by the Nazi in the Second World War. We have presented extensive evidence in this regard. Some recent publications in the Western media indirectly prove that the Russian army could not have been engaged in this. I would like to specifically draw your attention to the article in The Guardian, which says that it was published over the weekend. It confirms that civilians died from artillery rather than from the shooting, and that many more people were killed by artillery with flechettes, the metal darts. This busts at least two myths about Bucha. First, that the people were shot on the ground by Russian forces, of course, as they claim, and that they were allegedly shot by the Russian military. Because you don't have to be a military expert to assume that our army, staying in Bucha, would bombard the town where it was stationed. I think this is ridiculous and makes no sense. So I'm absolutely sure that there will be more publications of this kind to come. Even Kramatorsk is remembered less and less frequently right now, because it's also absolutely clear that this was a provocation against Russian forces. So we will continue to bust more myths. Stay tuned.
Ambassador. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, rather. The Secretary General is traveling to Moscow today after having met Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Ankara just now. In his meeting with the Turkish President, the Secretary General expressed his support for Turkey's ongoing diplomatic efforts in relation to the war in Ukraine. He and President Erdogan reaffirmed that their common objective is to end the war as soon as possible and to create conditions to end the suffering of civilians. They stressed the urgent need for effective access through humanitarian corridors to evacuate civilians and deliver much-needed assistance to impacted communities. The President and the Secretary General agreed to stay in contact to follow up on ongoing initiatives. They also discussed the impact of the war in Ukraine on regional and global issues, including energy, food, and finance. Tomorrow, in Moscow, as we mentioned, the Secretary General will have a working meeting and lunch with Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and will be received by President Vladimir Putin. Turning to Ukraine, the UN Crisis Coordinator Amin Awad yesterday called for an immediate stop in fighting in Mariupol to allow civilians trapped in the besieged city to safely evacuate. Mr. Awad warned that the lives of tens of thousands of people, including children and the elderly, are at stake in Mariupol. The call from the crisis coordinator comes as hostilities in Ukraine are escalating, causing more civilian casualties, impacting key civilian infrastructure across the country, and hampering aid to people stranded in areas with intense fighting, including Mariupol and Kherson. Our humanitarian colleagues tell us that according to security reports, airstrikes this morning have destroyed several train stations in the west and north-central Ukraine. During the weekend, shelling impacted several areas around Odessa, Mykolaiv, and Kharkiv. Across the country, and since the war began, the World Health Organization has confirmed more than 160 attacks against health facilities, and the UN Human Rights Office has confirmed that 2,400 civilians have been killed. The actual figures are likely to be much higher. The worsening situation has prompted our humanitarian colleagues to revise the humanitarian flash appeal as they continue to deliver aid to people across Ukraine. More than $2.25 billion is now required for needs inside Ukraine, more than double the amount requested when we launched the appeal on the 1st of March, a few days after the war began. Our colleagues stressed that continued international support will be essential to enable humanitarians in Ukraine to reach those whose lives have been upended by the war. For its part, the International Organization for Migration said that it has begun rehabilitating unused and damaged buildings, including school dormitories and hotels, to provide safer temporary accommodation to internally displaced persons in the Zakarpattia region in Ukraine. This is part of a new shelter rehabilitation program targeting almost 1 million internally displaced persons. This morning, the Deputy Secretary General, Amina Mohammed, spoke on behalf of the Secretary General at the opening of the Financing for Development Forum. She said that the global economy is under severe stress and that the Sustainable Development Goals are in need of urgent rescue. Financing for development is an essential part of the solution, she said, adding that so far the global response has fallen far short. That is why the Secretary General has established the Global Crisis Response Group on Food, Energy, and Finance to ensure high-level political leadership, to get ahead of the perfect storm of food, security, energy, and financing challenges, and to implement a coordinated global response. And you'll be able to hear more about the forum from our guest today, the President of the Economic and Social Council, Colin Vixen Kelapile. You'll have seen that we issued a statement this morning on Sudan, in which the Secretary General deplored the killing of civilians in Krynik locality, West Darfur, as well as the attacks on health facilities on the 24th of April. He calls for an immediate end to the violence. The Secretary General extends his deepest condolences to the families of those killed and wishes a speedy recovery to those injured. The Secretary General underscores that the primary responsibility for the protection of civilians in Darfur rests with the government of Sudan. He takes note of efforts undertaken by the Sudanese authorities to address the situation, including a commitment to evacuate injured civilians, and calls for the acceleration of the deployment of the joint security forces as per the Juba peace agreement. The Secretary General stresses the importance of strengthening security in Darfur, including through the implementation of the Juba peace agreement, bolstering the rule of law, safeguarding human rights, and fully implementing the national plan for the protection of civilians. He calls for unhindered humanitarian access and an independent investigation of this and other acts of intercommunal violence to ensure that those responsible for the violence are held accountable. And further on this, our humanitarian colleagues stress that the recent flare-up of clashes worsens the dire humanitarian situation in Krynik, where more than half of the population, which is some 265,700 people, were already believed to be in need of humanitarian aid at the beginning of this year. Humanitarian partners will undertake an immediate needs assessment and respond as soon as the security situation allows. The UN mission in South Sudan today strongly condemned the widespread sexual violence as well as killings, including beheadings, the burning alive of civilians, and attacks on aid workers in Lear County. The mission says that these are among the human rights violations documented during a surge in violence carried out by armed youth from Koch and Mayandit counties between February and April of this year. The UN mission has carried out 10 verification missions and says that 72 civilians were killed and 64 cases of sexual violence have been recorded. The Secretary General's Special Representative, Nicholas Haysom, said he is appalled by the horrific attacks on civilians, stressing that we must all do everything we can to ensure that victims and survivors get the justice they deserve and receive the care and support they need. Initial reports say that some 40,000 people have fled the violence in Lear, with thousands reportedly crossing the Nile to Fangak in Jonglei State. The UN mission has deployed additional peacekeepers to conduct regular patrols, including night patrols in Lear town. Peacekeepers are protecting displaced people and aid workers, but the mission stressed that the protection of civilians is first and foremost the responsibility of the government. The mission welcomes initial steps taken to form an investigation committee and the deployment of the military to restore security. Tor Vennesland, the UN Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, briefed the Security Council this morning. He said that in Jerusalem, the situation remains relatively calm, despite inflammatory rhetoric and violent clashes between Palestinians and Israeli security forces that have taken place at the holy sites. He told council members that there is no justification for acts of terrorism or violence against civilians. Violence, provocations, and incitement must stop immediately and be unequivocally condemned by all, he said. Mr. Vennesland also reiterated that political, religious, and community leaders on all sides must do their part to reduce tensions, uphold the status quo at the holy sites, and ensure that their sanctity is respected by all. In this regard, he welcomed statements by senior Israeli officials reiterating Israel's commitment to upholding the status quo and ensuring that only Muslims would be allowed to pray on the Holy Esplanade. Over the weekend, we issued readouts of the Secretary General's phone calls with Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett and Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. In those calls, the Secretary General discussed the situation at the holy sites in Jerusalem and efforts to lower tensions, end provocations and unilateral steps, and restore calm. The Secretary General reiterated that the status quo at the holy sites must be upheld and respected. Last night, the UN Interim Force in Lebanon, UNIFIL, detected a rocket being launched from South Lebanon towards Israel. Force Commander Major General Aroldo Lazaro was in immediate contact with authorities on both sides of the Blue Line to urge restraint. Nonetheless, the Israel Defense Forces fired back several dozen shells into Lebanon. Major General Lazaro called on all parties to avoid further escalation, expressing his concerns about the disproportionate response. Once the shelling ended, UNIFIL began an investigation to determine the facts. Peacekeepers are also working with the Lebanese armed forces to strengthen security throughout UNIFIL's area of operations and reduce the risk of further provocative acts. The UN mission in Mali strongly condemned yesterday's attacks on the Malian armed forces in Sévaré, Niano, and Bafo. Several soldiers were killed during these attacks. At the request of the Malian armed forces, the UN mission immediately deployed a rapid reaction force in Sévaré. In a tweet, the peacekeeping mission expressed its solidarity with the Malian armed forces and offered its sincere condolences to them and to the Malian people. In a statement issued over the weekend, the Secretary General welcomed the efforts of Kenya's President Uhuru Kenyatta and other Eastern African leaders to promote peace, stability, and development in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and the greater East African region. He commended the leaders of the region for their determination in working towards these objectives. He urges all local armed groups in the Democratic Republic of the Congo to participate unconditionally in the political process, and all foreign armed groups to disarm and return unconditionally and immediately to their respective countries of origin. The full statement is online. Also in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the World Health Organization is telling us that health authorities in the country have declared an outbreak of Ebola after a case was confirmed in Mbandaka, a city in the northwestern Equator province. This is the third outbreak in the province since 2018. So far, just one case has been confirmed, a 31-year-old man who died on the 21st of April. Efforts to stem the current outbreak are already underway. WHO experts based in the DRC are supporting the national authorities to ramp up key outbreak response tasks, including testing, contact tracing, treatment, as well as working with communities to support the public health measures to prevent infections. Vaccination is also set to kick off in the coming days. WHO said that many people in Mbandaka are already vaccinated against Ebola, which should help reduce the impact of the disease. And we issued a statement over the weekend to express the Secretary General's sadness following the death of Mwai Kibaki, former President of the Republic of Kenya. He extends his deepest condolences to the government and people of Kenya. Former President Kibaki will be remembered as a leader who made an important contribution to the development of Kenya. And we joined the head of our Office for West Africa and the Sahel, Mohamed Saleh Anadif, to express our sincere condolences to the families of the victims and to the government and people of Nigeria following the tragic explosion that claimed the lives of about 100 people in a gasoline refinery in Imo State in southern Nigeria. We wish a speedy recovery to those injured in the explosion. And our UN team in Brazil, led by Resident Coordinator Sylvia Rux, continues supporting authorities to respond to the multiple impacts of the pandemic, focusing on promoting sustainable development. More than 14 million students benefited from UN-backed homeschooling initiatives led by local and national authorities to date. Our UN team has also provided technical support to national and local authorities to safely reopen schools that were closed for 52 weeks, and is now working to locate and re-enroll students that have dropped out. Through the Joint Sustainable Development Goals Fund, 1.5 million vulnerable people, especially children up to 6 years old and their families, were reached with health, education, and social assistance services in more than 3,000 municipalities so far. In partnership with the federal government, we also trained 20,000 professionals that provide direct assistance to families. A group of 13 UN entities also assisted more than 140,000 Venezuelans in Brazil with shelter, food, education, health, and integration services. On the health front, nearly 4,000 health centers received support to maintain essential immunization services since the onset of the pandemic, and nearly 14 million vaccines landed via COVAX to support the national vaccination drive. As I mentioned, the guest today will be the president of the Economic and Social Council, Colin Vixen Kelapile. He will join us in this room to brief on the Financing for Development Forum and the high-level political forum on sustainable development. Then at 1:15 p.m., there will be a hybrid briefing here on the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Peoples. The speakers will be Dario José Mejía Montalvo, chair-elect of the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues and leader of the National Indigenous Organization of Colombia, and Roseanne Archibald, National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations. Tomorrow, my guest will be Mami Mizutori, the Secretary General Special Representative for Disaster Risk Reduction and head of the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. She will brief on the UN Disaster Risk Reduction Global Assessment on Risk 2022. Then at 1:30 p.m., there will be a hybrid press briefing on the forthcoming 55th session of the UN Commission on Population and Development. Speakers will include Ambassador Enrique A. Manalo, President Representative of the Philippines, Permanent Representative of the Philippines to the United Nations, and Chair of the 55th session of the Commission on Population and Development. So that was a mouthful, and now we'll turn to your questions. Yes, James, and then Edie.
Yes. Can I ask more about the trip? Has the Secretary General got any new proposals that he'll be taking to Moscow and then on to Kyiv? And specifically, is he going to be asking, he asked for that Easter truce that never happened, is he going to be asking for any sort of ceasefire, truce or pause when he sees the two leaders?
Well, as you're aware, we continue to call for a ceasefire or some sort of pause. The Secretary General did that, as you know, just last week. Clearly, that didn't happen in time for Easter. Amin Awad has called, as I just mentioned, for a ceasefire in the Mariupol area. And so there are many such initiatives and suggestions that he will be bringing. I don't want to give too many details at this stage of the sort of proposals he will have. I think we're coming at a fairly delicate moment. It's important that he is able to talk clearly with the leadership on both sides and see what progress we can make. Ultimately, the end goal is to have a halt to fighting and to have ways to improve the situation of the people in Ukraine, lessen the threat that they're under, and provide humanitarian aid towards them. So those are the goals we're trying, and there are certain ways that we'll try to move those forward, and we'll try to provide the details as the visits happen.
And as you're probably aware, President Zelensky has already been very critical. He says it's simply wrong that he's going to Moscow first, then to Kyiv. He says there's no justice and no logic in this order. Is the Secretary General pandering to the Russians by going to Moscow first?
This is a trip where the important thing was to visit the two countries and meet with the leaders. We worked out an itinerary, and indeed we worked it out with both sides, and both sides had accepted it in the days before he set out on his travel. So he's doing that. There's no particular significance in him visiting one country ahead of the other. Obviously, one country has to be first, and this is how the arrangements have worked out. But the crucial point is you've heard what the Secretary General has had to say since the start of this particular crisis. I don't think anyone can say that he is being, as you had put it, pandering to a side on this.
So is he surprised by the criticism then? If it was worked out well in advance with both sides, is he surprised by the quite harsh criticism by President Zelensky?
I think the point is that he's not deterred one way or another. He is dedicated to improving the situation on the ground. As you know, many of you in this very room had been asking for weeks, why isn't he going? And so the answer had been that he would go at a time when he really believes that there's a concrete opportunity. He thinks that there is an opportunity now, and we'll make the most of what we can. A lot of diplomacy is about timing, about finding out when is the right time to speak with a person, to travel to a place, to do certain things. And he is going in the anticipation that there's a real opportunity that is now availing itself, and we'll see what we can make of it. Edie, and then Joe, and then Abdulhamid.
Following up on that, he believes there is a real opportunity for what? To do open humanitarian corridors, to actually move toward a ceasefire, even though the Russian deputy ambassador today indicated that that wasn't really in the cards.
We'll see what can be made. I don't want to oversell things. Obviously, this has been a very difficult 2 months. A lot of people have died. There's been a lot of destruction. But you can see that even the willingness of the parties to meet with him, to discuss things with him, is an opening. And we'll see what we can do, whether we can get a concrete improvement in the humanitarian situation, whether we can get fighting to stop for any period of time. Again, I don't want to oversell the possibility that any of these things can happen. None of these things are quick, and diplomacy doesn't work like a magic wand. Sometimes it can be frustratingly slow. But I do think that he believes that there's a chance to get a better situation, and he's willing to take that.
Can you give us some details about his travels? He's in Ankara right now.
He is actually not in Ankara right now. He is in transit. He is on an airplane. And at some point later today, he will be landing in Moscow. Tomorrow, he will be in Moscow. And again, we've mentioned the meetings with Mr. Lavrov and Mr. Putin. After that, we've already mentioned the travel to Kyiv. I think that there will need to be an interim stop in the middle, but we'll let you know what we can say about that before we get to that. I mean, some of that is a question of logistics. As you know, you can't.
Is he still slated to be in Kyiv on Thursday?
Yes, he is. Joe, and then Abdulhamid, and we'll keep going around this road.
Thank you.
Yes.
First, a very quick follow-up on Ukraine, and then I have a question on Lebanon. On Ukraine, you've said several times, and I believe it was also in the letter or in the response to the letter, that the Secretary General will be received by President Putin. He's going to have a working meeting, a luncheon with Foreign Secretary Lavrov, but he's going to be received by Mr. Putin. Could you explain the distinction? Does received just mean a brief appearance, photo op, whatever you want to call it, and not a substantive meeting? And is that whatever occurs with President Putin, will it be basically the same with President Zelensky? So that's my follow-up on Ukraine. You want me to ask the other question, or do you want to answer that one?
Yes, I mean, the meetings are as I've said them. I believe you can, whether you say that he was received by or that he met with, he will meet with President Putin, just like he will meet with President Zelensky. We'll provide further details about the substance of those meetings once they've happened.
Okay, but he's not, is he expecting or hoping for a substantive discussion with both presidents? Is that something in his planning, or
Well, I mean,
you can't comment on that?
In terms of how the meetings go, we'll provide you the details of them once they've happened.
Okay. On Lebanon, my question is, Israel's ambassador this morning said that UNIFIL was blocked from accessing various residences in southern Lebanon where it's suspected that Hezbollah has hidden rockets and other munitions. Are you able to confirm that that's been the case?
No, and what I can tell you is that UNIFIL has already begun its own investigation to determine the facts. I mentioned that, and so it's going to continue with that investigation, and it will also be working, as I mentioned, with the Lebanese armed forces about how to strengthen security in the area of operations. Abdelhamid.
Yes, Farhan. This morning, in the stakeout, the Israeli ambassador stood before the accredited journalist. I asked him a question respectfully. I called him Mr. Ambassador. And I emphasized that if he admits there is occupied territories, and we spoke about what's going on now and how the Palestinians should react to occupation. So in his answer, he insulted me personally when he said that we are trying to ensure the security of your terrorist organizations. That's the way he addressed me. I don't accept that, and I want a stand from the spokesman office and from UNCA.
Well, I don't speak for UNCA, but regarding your treatment, of course, we ask for all reporters to be treated cordially and with respect. But for any follow-up, really, that is a matter for our colleagues in the Media Accreditation and Liaison Unit, and I suggest you talk to them.
There is a precedent. When the French ambassador, Arnaud, insulted Nizar, our colleague Nizar, Stéphane read something here in this room about the fact that the spokesman office respects all those journalists. So would you issue something similar to that?
As I just said, that we want all journalists to be treated cordially and with respect. Again, though, for follow-up in terms of relations with journalists, that is the mandate, really, of our colleagues in the Media Accreditation and Liaison Service. So if you have any further complaints, really, it's they and not us who are responsible for that. Michelle.
Thanks, Farhan. Back to Ukraine. The Russian Foreign Ministry has said that it plans to discuss with the Secretary General Mariupol and the steel plant and this humanitarian corridor that Russia has announced, which Ukraine has said it hasn't agreed to. And Ukraine is pushing for the UN to be the initiator and the guarantor of any such deal. Is the UN in a position to take on this role? Is this something that's being discussed already?
I don't think I can make any commitments on this from this podium right now. The Secretary General is having his travels. I'm sure that the situation in Mariupol will be one of the topics that's discussed with his interlocutors, and we'll see what progress we make on that as a result of the meetings that he's having.
Does the UN have the capacity in Ukraine to be able to take on a broad role in this manner across the country if the parties agree to it?
Everything depends on what the parties themselves agree to. As you know from UN experiences around the world, the capacity can be found if there's agreement. Benno and then Pam.
Thank you, Farhan. Is there any possibility that the SG is traveling somewhere else in Ukraine apart from Kyiv?
I don't have anything besides Kyiv to mention at this point. If there's anything further to add, we'll let you know when we can. The logistics for his travels are being worked out. Yes, Pam.
It's actually similar questions about the trip. Is there any possibility of a stop somewhere along the line in Moldova? And is there a possibility of a stop somewhere in Poland? And will there be a press availability either here at UN headquarters or remotely from the SG after the meeting with President Zelensky, which is the second of the two big meetings. Is it possible to have us briefed?
Stefan is traveling with the Secretary General. He's exploring what the options are for press availabilities. If something opens up, including to have Stefan, for example, call in, we would certainly do that. But a lot of this is in flux. Right now, we're trying to work out what all the arrangements will be. I do believe that there will be an additional country he travels into between the visits to Moscow and Kyiv. We'll let you know further details once we can. Right now, again, these are arrangements that are being worked out.
Okay, and on Ankara, was there any video, audio, anything other than the readout that we saw?
Besides the readout that you saw, there were some photographs taken by our own Stefan Dujarric, which are available on Twitter and should be on our photo sites.
Okay.
Yes.
Sorry, just another follow-up on the trip, and it's less than 2 weeks since the Secretary General said to us he didn't see the possibility, or he didn't see an opening for a humanitarian ceasefire at that moment.
Yes.
Has something changed in the past 2 weeks?
I think you'll have seen from the very fact that the Secretary General after that last week made another push for a humanitarian ceasefire, and then decided to travel to those, that there is some movement. How real that is, what we can make of it, that it's still too early to determine that. But again, there are moments of opportunity, and there are times when you need to see what you can make out of that, and he's doing what he can. Before we go to others, there have been some people waiting on the chat room. I believe Benny and Evelyn. So we'll go to Benny and Evelyn, and then over to you, Stefano. Benny.
So two questions. First, on the trip, on the Secretary General's trip, the Prime Minister Johnson has reportedly warned against the SG becoming like a tool of Russian propaganda. Do you have any comment on that?
Not especially. I mean, the Secretary General has been doing this job for quite a long time, and he's been involved in international politics for quite a long time. He knows about perceptions, and he knows how to deal with issues like the ones that you're talking about. I don't think that this is a big concern any more than it is when he travels to other countries.
Okay, and my second question on a totally different topic. Whenever there is a statement from the SG about the Temple Mount, they're talking about the status quo. Does the UN have a list of status quo issues that are that what is exactly the status quo, and also which parts of it, if any, have been violated?
I would just refer you to what Mr. Venisland has been saying. And indeed, we've mentioned this many times. We've mentioned this many times over the years, and it's very clear when these issues arise what is being referred to. And, there's been many such discussions. Certainly over the past 2 decades, I've seen this happen every now and again, and you'll see what is meant by that. Evelyn?
Yeah, but it's very generalized. They say the status quo, and my question is, what is the status quo?
In discussions with the leaders on the various sides, they're very precise in what they say. You certainly know when the status quo is being violated because you can see it from the consequences on the ground. Evelyn? If Evelyn's not there, then we'll turn to Stefano.
Sorry, can you?
Yes, now I can.
About that. Is there any more information on Ukrainians being asked to, or physically or forcibly transported to Russia from the south of the country? And then I have a second question on other topics.
These are things that our colleagues on the ground are following up on. Obviously, we have concerns about anyone who is being moved against their will, and so we're continuing to check and see what is happening on the ground. Again, we implore all sides to abide by our principles, including the principles of non-refoulement, and the principle that all those who are being moved need to do so with their consent. Your other question?
On a total topic, yes. On Darfur, who was responsible for the attacks? Is it the Janjaweed of the old days? And if so, is the UN going to give a report on it? And has the Sudanese government moved to stop them quickly, or do they still harbor sympathy for them?
Well, on those attacks, I mean, you'll have seen the Secretary General's statement from this morning. Volker Perthes,
Yes.
our special representative on the ground, has also issued a statement expressing dismay and calling for an end to the violence. And so he's following up. It would certainly need to be investigated, the responsibility of parties for this latest violence. Okay, Stefano, and then we'll go back to another round.
Thank you, Farhan. It's about, again, on the trip of Secretary General in Moscow and then Kyiv. When did he speak? Did he speak in preparation of this trip? Did he have contact with the President of the United States, brainstorm anything?
Not with the president. He has been speaking to senior U.S. officials and indeed many other senior officials by phone in recent days.
And did there come any interesting ideas from the Americans to him about what to say to Putin and so on?
He talks to a number of different leaders. I wouldn't characterize what their discussions are in any particular detail, but certainly he's apprised of the viewpoints of most of the key governments in terms of what needs to be achieved. Yes, James.
Yeah, I'm afraid I have a few more on Ukraine. So first, just to follow up on what you were saying earlier on, you said diplomacy is all about timing, and we'd been asking for weeks why the Secretary General wasn't travelling, and now he thinks it's the right time. Why is it now the right time?
I think this is a result of the sort of discussions, the sort of calls that he's had. I don't really want to go farther than that because, again, this is a delicate moment. We want to do as much as we can to ensure the chances of success. Because ultimately, if we can move ahead, even in a small way, it will mean a tremendous amount to tens or hundreds of thousands of people. So I wouldn't give any details, but certainly we feel that there's a moment of opportunity, and this is the time to move ahead with that.
Okay, slightly self-serving question, but there are no press travelling with the Secretary General. I know he made his call. He only sent the letters last week on Tuesday, and it's been organised quite swiftly. But when other leaders travel to Moscow, even at short notice, they take their press corps with them. The same leaders who've travelled, despite it being an active war zone, who've travelled to Kyiv have taken press with him. Why does the Secretary General not take reporters with him on a trip like this? Surely, not only is he making the trip, but he needs to be properly seen making the trip. And if he doesn't have accompanying press, then there's a limit to how we can cover this.
Well, we're going to try to do as much as we can to see whether we can have some sort of event at these stops where press can be. We certainly want to have press involvement. But in this case, these are travel arrangements. Even now, the travel arrangements that he's making are still being worked out. And so there are different things that may need to shift. It would be very difficult to do that with a press contingent at this time. There are many times when we have press travel with us on different places, but those are trips that where the arrangements aren't quite as fluid as this one.
But that's exactly the point. The arrangements are fluid because of the importance of this trip. I would say the most important trip he's made as Secretary General, and he's taking not a single reporter with him.
I mean, you have to remember, we don't have the sort of resources that governments do. When he travels by plane, he travels by commercial flight. When in some of these arrangements may need to happen by road, which will be even more difficult. It's not at all the same thing, and it's not really the case that we can do that. If you were in charge of the logistics for this sort of thing, you would understand it fairly rapidly.
No, I mean, I do understand it, but I think we in this room have to keep making the point that we want access. I have another question on Ukraine, a separate question, separate from the visit. The chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court has announced that he is now going to work with the joint investigation team, which is gathering evidence of war crimes on the ground. One, your reaction to the fact that the ICC is now joining that joint investigation team, which I believe is made up of the Polish, Ukrainian and Lithuanian authorities. And can you also explain to us what is the liaison between your human rights monitors on the ground, that you have people on the ground and have had for some time, with those that are gathering evidence of war crimes, who are trying to do the accountability work? Are they sharing their evidence with this joint investigation team and, for that matter, with the International Criminal Court?
Well, certainly the human rights personnel that we have are willing to share relevant information with people who are wanting to follow up for accountability's sake. We'd have to see how that proceeds. Regarding the International Criminal Court, that is ultimately a body with judicial independence from the United Nations. So I am constrained from really commenting about the course of any of their substantive investigations. Obviously, we want to make sure that in the work that they do, that they're supported by the governments who are, including those who are parties to the Rome Statute of the ICC.
I have one more on one other thing, if you don't mind.
Okay, one more, and then we'll go to Abdelhamid.
Yeah, which is on Yemen. Mm-hmm. There was supposed to be, it was heralded as the first civilian flight. Big breakthrough was supposed to happen this weekend. It didn't. The flight from Sana'a to Amman in Jordan. UN's reaction?
Yes, Hans Grünberg is still working with the parties. We feel that this would be a significant step forward. And so he's trying to work out and see what can happen so that this particular achievement is actually reached. At the same time, we're not discouraged. We have seen the halt in fighting holding very largely throughout the country. We have seen fuel ships get in to Yemen. So there's different signs, different markers of progress, and we want to achieve this marker. Mr. Grünberg is working, and he's in discussions, and we'll see whether we can move forward on this as well. Abdelhamid, and then we'll go to our guest.
Thank you, Farhan, again. Last Friday, as 150,000 worshippers were leaving Al-Aqsa Mosque, an Israeli drone dropped tear gas on the prayers. Dozens of prayers were injured, one of them critically. Now, my question, did Mr. Thor Winsland pick up this precedent? I didn't hear it from him. And if not, would he comment on this unprecedented case of harassment of the Palestinian worshippers?
No, Mr. Vennesland has spoken, including just now, just a few hours ago, about the need for respect of all worshippers. And again, our point is that the status quo at all holy sites must be respected, and this incident is part and parcel of that. That
Has
we
it
need to
been
make sure that all
mentioned?
worshippers are able to go about their prayers.
Has this incident had been mentioned about the drone dropping tear gas on worshippers?
No, he did. If you look at his full briefing, he did mention a wide variety of incidents
I know.
In more general terms, but he has mentioned them. And with that, let's go to our guest. Thanks very much.
This show has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions.media for more information.